Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to our new webinar today. Today we have a webinar, a discussion with Mr. Svilen Rangelov, co-founder and CEO of Dronamics. It's the company which has established a first drone delivery network in Europe. So, Svilen, hello, thank you very much for your participation. And today we'll have talk, and our host today is Andrew Charlton from Aviation Advocacy. Hi, Andrew.
Good morning to you, Tom.
So I like to thank all participants. So also I like to give you a few welcome notes and some operational information. First of all, my name is Tom Gavazzi. I am director of the WUM, the platform for the webinars, especially in the aviation industry. So first of all, I like to tell you that we are recording the webinar, and tomorrow you will receive the link with the record and some materials, etc., to your mail. Also, you can ask the questions through Q&A through the chat to our guest today. And also, you can make some screenshots and so on if you liked from today's webinar. Also, on the end of the webinar, it will be one poll about your satisfaction. So please fulfill it. Because then we can organize webinar with some topics in the future of your interest. So this is more or less all from my side. I wish a good and pleasant time on the webinar today. So Andrew, please.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. This is another Blue Sky seminar where we're going to talk about innovation and technology for aviation into the future. I think it's a fascinating topic. We've got about 100 people watching. Can I just say konnichiwa, or perhaps actually more accurately, obande gozaimasu to our friends in Japan, ni hao to our friends in China, and hello and good afternoon, good morning to our friends elsewhere around the world. Delighted to be joined by Svilen today, Svilen from Dronamics. Good morning to you, Svilen. Tell me about Dronamics. How long has it been going? You're on mute, I'm afraid. New technology, it's a wonderful thing. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Tell me, how long has Dronamics been going? What's the background?
Yeah, nice to see you again, Andrew, Tom. Thanks for having me. Dronamics was started 6.5 years ago, back in 2014. When my brother, who's an aerospace engineer, and myself, I've studied economics and always been more passionate about trade. We saw the huge opportunity that the Amazon drones could open up, and we thought these were great, but they are great for last mile. What if we could create a flying delivery van of sorts and work for the middle mile or the second to last mile, if you will.
Okay, so your brother's an aeronautical engineer. What did you study?
I studied economics. I studied in the US. He studied in the Netherlands. We came back to do it in Bulgaria.
You're Bulgarian?
Yeah, we are both Bulgarian. We came back in 2014 to do it in Bulgaria because of the at the time, investment in such big aircraft was not so easy to come by. It's not like today where you have every day a flying vehicle making the news. It was quite a journey to develop a completely clean sheet aircraft from a country that for 70 years has not built a new aircraft.
All right. When you say an aircraft of this size, how big are we talking? I presume that's the aircraft we can see behind you.
Yeah, that's a visual. It's 16 meters wingspan and 8 meters long. So we've put the other vehicles for scale. Its cargo capacity is 3.5 cubic meters and 350 kilograms. This is very important because as we would fit underserved routes to smaller airfields and smaller unserved communities. most of the goods will be, it wouldn't be one pallet of the same product. It would be different boxes for different customers. And boxes are typically very, very, bulky. So
yes, I was thinking, important. In fact, it's probably the 3.5 cubic meters is more important than the 350 kilograms, in fact.
Very much so, and that's precisely, 100 kilos to the cubic meter is what's the sweet spot for e-commerce, whereas, more general cargo is 170 kilos to the cubic meter. And especially when it goes to specialty products, it can be much higher as well.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking from personal experience, whenever you get an e-commerce box, there's a lot more box than there is product. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Or often, not always true if you buy books, but otherwise, yeah. And so, this is the only vehicle you're making. Do you see yourself having a range from, I don't know, 200 kilos to a ton or something like that?
Yeah, we. In the future, we could be open to that. There is a natural limit. I don't think we'll do a vehicle that's more than 2 tons in capacity. Maybe even above a ton will be not easy to justify economically.
Right.
The reason is the bigger you get, the more you come back to the traditional aviation scenario where, you produce very few units because they're so big. They need very big airports, and essentially you're restricted in terms of capacity. It's so for every in Europe, for every 1,000 kilograms that go by road, less than 6 kilograms. For every ton that travels by ground, 6 kilograms fly. It's very small percentage. Is less than 1%. Yeah. And it's similar, it's even lower in markets around the world. So there's a lot of cargo that aviation is not touching yet.
Okay, so much to unpack. You said that the size you've got works really well and it allows you to go to aerodromes, airfields, grass strips, or do they have to be paved?
They do not have to be paved. In our case, we thought, look, if we're going to underserved regions, there's 55,000 airfields around the world in all kinds of shapes and sizes and conditions, and a lot of them are
rectangular.
yeah, hopefully flat.
Yeah, well, indeed.
But it's not always the case. A lot of them are not seeing a lot of use. There's no investment done, and so we needed it to make it sort of village friendly, essentially like a bush plane. So we designed the landing gear and the structure in such a way to sustain. We only need about 400 meters of runway.
That was going to be my next question. 400 meters. So I mean, a large car park would get you there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and provided there's like no trees in the car park.
Well, indeed, sure. No cars in the car.
Yeah. But no, that's true. So we're starting with a network of airport partners that we're signing up now. We have around 40 in Europe already signed up. Airports like Liège, Brescia, Seinäjoki in Finland, Osijek in Croatia. We are, starting with airports, but eventually we would be moving into logistic centers, industrial parks, seaports. Yeah, it's a really versatile platform.
Right. Okay. So I mean, Liège, those other ones, they're all airports that have actually got 3-letter codes and all that sort of stuff. I mean. So, and Liège, if I'm right, is quite a large cargo airport already. FedEx,
they did.
One of them, yeah.
I think they hit 1 million tons last year.
Yeah, that's a fair bit. So your product then, your aeroplane is the right word, I guess it is. Yeah, your aeroplane takes the stuff there. Once it's disaggregated at Liège or wherever, you then take it to the next place. As you say, the second last mile, not the last mile. And then it's distributed from there by people small
like
vans or on bikes or whatever. Okay, right. That all makes perfect sense. A bunch of other questions. What sort of altitude does it fly at?
We use a Rotax engine. So with it, we can go as high as 18, 20,000 feet.
So
so we have quite a range.
well and truly into controlled airspace, though. It doesn't fly in Class G.
Yeah.
So how do you talk to the controllers?
Well, it's in our model we have drone operators at each of the drone ports, and these operators are in charge of the takeoffs and landings and the taxiing. And then during cruise, control switches over to a network ops center. That's our own, and that's this ops center is almost like our own air traffic control, but with additional capability to via satellite to connect and redirect flight if there's a need. In cargo, it's fairly simple. You go from the origin to destination. Of course, you follow the waypoints, but the point is you don't need to have somebody at the controls throughout the whole journey. And we've seen that even with manned aviation.
Yeah, well, increasingly. Mm.
So the question really with ATC is, being in controlled airspace helps actually because it increases the safety, but also the routes we're flying, there aren't other flights on these routes, and because if there are, there wouldn't be a business case for us. But the thing is, the ATC connects not to the machine. There's nobody inside. It connects to the NOC, the ops center.
To your control center. So how many? When I'm really interested that you're talking in the present tense, but let's talk in the future tense. How many units do you expect to have, and how many units would each of your operators operate simultaneously?
Yeah, so we're initially starting with a model where there's two operators in control of one flight that's coming in and taking off at any given moment. So as soon as it takes off, then they switch to the next flight that needs to be taken care of. When it comes to the folks at the ops center, there's academic research that varies between 10 to 15 aircraft at a time that a single person could safely monitor and intervene if there's
en
any.
route.
Yeah. So this is what we're relying on. And of course, with more technology, more experience, the fact that it's a single type operation, this could be optimized further. But yeah, for the time being, these are the plans.
So you have services operating now?
Not yet. We're almost finished with the machine. We'll spend the rest of the year testing it. And we're also going to be producing the first units and potentially launching services Q1 next year, Q1 or Q2.
So where are the machines being made?
Initially in Bulgaria. We're talking to several aerospace manufacturers to potentially build these for us at large scale. We need capabilities of at least 1,000 aircraft per year in a facility. And this sounds a lot for aviation, but again, it's a small aircraft. So 1,000 aircraft is just 350 tons. It's the equivalent of 3 jumbo jets.
Yeah, right. Well, we were speaking in this series earlier, some viewers will remember, to Pipistrel, and they look at 1,000 units a year and think that's a pretty good year. So, yeah. Right. And so in terms of licensing and getting your type certification and so forth, you're working through Bulgaria directly to EASA or direct to EASA?
So the new rules make it the role of the National Aviation Authority. Typically, well, it's very interesting. The EC regulation actually says the country decides who would be the competent authority to approve these. And I don't think we've come across where it's not the CAA. But you essentially apply on a national basis, and you get the equivalent of a AOC, but for drones. And then the question becomes, depending on the type of operations and the type of system you're using, whether you need a type certificate or not. And EASA and actually JARUS has come up with this risk assessment framework called SORA, Specific Operating Risk Assessment. And based on that, you determine the limitations of the type of operation that you need to do with the machine. In our case, the fact that we use a certified aviation engine that already exists, people have flown with it, it has an EASA certificate. The fact that we're fixed wing, that we need, that we only fly between locations that we control or designated airports in the beginning. All of this is so similar to the existing manned aviation framework that it actually decreases the risk.
Right.
And because we optimized the aircraft to be very fuel efficient, we didn't just take a Cessna or a Pipistrel and try to put boxes inside it and on autopilot. By creating a new airframe, we realized we need to really make it fuel efficient because cargo just doesn't want to pay high operating costs. And by virtue of that, we have a really good glide ratio, and we are, at the altitude we fly at, if there's an issue, there's quite a bit of distance that we can cover before we need to, before we need to land. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. It's not like a VTOL or
aviation is generally safe because it has both speed and altitude on its side. So
yeah, but when you have wings, it really, really makes a difference.
Well, absolutely, my very word. But at the moment, your plan is to have a controller at each end, both at the point of departure and the point of arrival. So you couldn't, for example, use your system to do an ad hoc delivery to an airport that you don't currently have a controller in. Would that be the case?
No, and to be frank, the regulations would also be a lot tougher than because look, it's usually everyone's first thought, right? Like the drones really enable and this multi-rotor vertical mobility can truly open a lot of new opportunities. But let's not kid ourselves. Like if you have permanent commercial services, you will have deliveries permanently to a given location. So you will need to, base staff there. You will need to make sure that's a secure area and so on. So whether you have one drone port as an entry point for a given, neighborhood or community, or if you have, 10 vertiports, I'm not sure the 10 vertiports don't cost zero.
Oh no!
Either in capital nor in operating costs. So that's not really intuitive, but it's actually a big contributor to the efficiency.
Yeah, but I mean that must limit your customer base or your potential customer base, because if you've got to work on effectively on scheduled services, I mean that nicely, but regular route, regular cargo routes, if you like, rather than, for example, someone saying, I need to make this delivery to this, factory in some obscure place very urgently. It can't be done on the roads because whatever,
Yeah.
Which then brings me to the question, so who do you see as your customers?
Well, so cargo always has a purpose. The customers are the people in the businesses, the end customers, and they don't really move. Like this migration is a very tiny part of, people stay in the same place for a long time, and they consume and they produce and they have inflows and outflows all the time. So we look at it, how can we enter that city, that town, and be that gateway for it. Because the moment you have an airport, a drone port, for example, Brescia or it's an airport in Sweden we're partnering with. They, because you don't have crew on board, you can activate the flight to any of the other drone ports that already exist. So the more drone ports you have in the network, the more valuable it becomes to be part of that network, because that one door you have in your community is a gateway to all the other communities. And so that's something really powerful. Now, the direct entities we sell to are, couriers, forwarders, some end customers, brands that, for example, from pharma or spare parts that need urgent parts. And you're absolutely right. If there's a factory in a given town, they would need the spare parts from just a very specific type of location where that warehouse for Europe is, for example, and so on. So it's important for us, of course, to have drone ports at both ends. But the thing is, if there's a factory, there's probably other business. So it already makes sense for us to have a drone port in that location, even though from that one customer, we may have just once a week or once a month orders. There are other people living there that will need other types of cargo. And this is why it was so important to make the airframe in a cheap and accessible way, so that it can be versatile and used not just for the urgent, high value, premium stuff, but also for e-commerce.
So do you think the creation of drone ports is going to be a rate determining step?
I think it's a key part of the journey. And look, again, we need to take off and land from somewhere. I think the future of cities would be even, having several of these all around, sort of like a circle around the ring road of the city or whatnot. And
but many cities already have small and seldom used airports or airfields.
And this is just a huge enabler for something like us. But the problem is they don't have right now capacity, because you can't, with 350, it's very easy to fill up, to sail 350 kilos going to a small airport in a given neighborhood, rather than, a 737 or a wide body freighter.
But is Dronomics involved in trying to develop drone ports? I mean, are you actively getting into the infrastructure part of what you do as well as the service part?
So we what we realized is just the machine is not enough. We need to all that ground equipment, we need to standardize it so that we can have the same sort of McDonald's kitchen at every ground point.
But even on that point, I mean, one of the things I think we're watching with the discussion about eVTOL equipment and drones and what have you and so on, is at the moment each manufacturer is starting to develop its own specifications. And so I guess, to use your analogy, if you put down a McDonald's kitchen at a small airfield somewhere, you can use it, but what happens if someone that's using Burger King wants to come along? Is there any work going on to try to standardize the kitchen, to use your analogy?
I think there will be, as soon as there's a winning kitchen concept. This is the bet we've placed. We hope and we plan that it's the winner, but the market will really show. And I think, look, speaking of kitchens, you're right. So the McDonald's kitchen is one, then you have Burger King. And what you have now, it's really interesting. You have all these ghost kitchens, which are essentially landlords and say, hey, everyone needs a stove, everyone needs this. So let's accumulate and just work on that. I think that is the natural evolution, but individual types of kitchens had to come first in order to learn from what is the most optimal and most cookie cutter design.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to risk going too far down the kitchen analogy road here in a moment, but manned aviation seems to use the Paul Bocuse kitchen rather than, it's absolutely Rolls-Royce in every way.
Yeah.
But that also, though, the other thing that we're watching differently to manned aviation is that the drone operators, or the UAM operators, the eVTOL operators, whether you're talking Joby or Airbus or whatever, all of them seem to want to be the service provider as well as the equipment provider, right? They are looking at running their own UAM system. They're looking at running their own provisions and so forth. Is that how you see it growing for yourselves? Do you think Dronomics will become a courier business or only the manufacturer or enabler of courier businesses?
That's a really great question. I should have clarified earlier. We actually sell capacity. We don't sell the equipment. We sell capacity on that network that we build. So we are only a middle mile network, so kind of like an airline plus ground handler operation. We don't have yet this end-to-end capability to the very last mile. We hope to partner with it on it with some of the winners of that, whoever they may be. But we're not selling, a number of units or a number of drone ports.
Right. Another part of it, we're sort of kind of nearly back to the kitchen question. Don't say that when drunk.
So it's almost lunchtime here. So.
Well, indeed. Is it obvious? But your propulsion is gasoline, isn't it? Normal fuel.
Yeah, it's actually, more gas. Perfect. Yeah, so what you can put in a car, you can, put in our aircraft.
Yeah, right. But I'd have thought that the seminal kitchen of the future is going to involve electricity, isn't it? Why did you choose to go with gasoline rather than electric?
Well, because I think it was less than a year ago that the first sort of electric propulsion system got certified ever, and this was Pipistrel. And when you look at, they've done tremendous work, but still, to achieve that range, the battery capacity is nowhere near what we need. We need literally many tons of batteries in order to have a meaningful range. And regulators are super skeptical against anything lithium-based. This may change with new chemistries and so on, but as you know, lithium batteries are themselves considered dangerous goods. And a lot of people have been working on them for a long time, and yet only one has ever been certified, like the Pipistrel one. We didn't want to wait for a future that may or may not come. We hope it will come, but and to put your mind at ease, in terms of emissions, we're actually 40 to 70% lower because of the aerodynamics that we have, because of the type of operations we have. And that's even, before we use any, for example, biofuels. Right. So we're already greener. Like our mileage is better than that white vehicle that you see there.
Unfortunately doesn't sound all that hard to achieve, as a matter of fact, because I don't think they're particularly efficient. But and so the other thing I've always thought, this is a personal rant of mine, but the other thing I've always thought is the safety criteria that we're using. This is an aeroplane, you're working through EASA, is 10 to the minus 9. Whereas actually perhaps what we should be looking at is the safety criteria of 2 trucks and how many accidents there are involving cargo trucks, which you're now going to hopefully take off the road.
Yeah, I don't know. Aviation is safe, and it's gotten to that point of safety, and I don't think anyone wants to take steps back from that point. I definitely see reason in that kind of way of thinking, but I am myself skeptical that this is what the regulators will eventually agree to. I think the bar will keep getting raised rather than ever being lowered, and it will be up to us, and to make sure that the engineering can catch up with these expectations. So the good thing is the bad thing is if the bar is different for different folks. So if the bar was one for Airbus, but another for a smaller player, then we have a problem. Right. Of course, a higher bar always favors the bigger entrants, the bigger players. But it's aviation after all. So
well, indeed. But do you see competition? Do you have any competitors? I mean, talking about Airbus, perhaps.
I don't think, or I don't know if they're doing anything like that. If they are, I mean, we keep a close eye on competition. But so far, we haven't heard of them going after the middle mile. It's not a very grateful business to that market segment that we're after, because it needs to be as cheap as possible. And new technology is by default never cheap.
No.
So the end customer doesn't care if you have a pilot or not, or if you come with a donkey or a balloon or whatever. All they care about is the package, has it arrived, is it here, and did I pay, if possibly, nothing. So that kind of pressure is really grueling and is keeping a lot of people away from this segment. When we started, it's not such a novel idea, right? Like that parcels don't necessarily need a pilot. Well, we're not the first company, and we won't be the last. But from 2014, when we started, we're the only ones standing.
Right.
The list of competitors is completely changed, and it will keep changing because, just difficult.
So not so much competitors, but the people with whom you're going to have to interact, I guess. At one level, you've got the hobbyists, you've got drone, classic quadcopter drones and what have you. And of course, at the top end, you've got the military and all of their drones. But did you get to use any of that sort of previously worked through by either the hobbyists or the military in your technology, or is yours completely your brother's aeronautical degree in action?
Well, we did use quite a bit of off-the-shelf, not necessarily for the hobby level, but nothing we have is military grade. It was important because there are some really great products, especially on the systems side, but they are export controlled, and that really ruins the whole business case. So we had to see what we could do to sort of bridge that gap, like having the high reliability, but it's off-the-shelf performance. Right. And I think the whole industry is going into that direction. Passenger vehicles, everyone, they need more mass market components.
But then how do you interact or react with hobbyists and people, the classic small drones, even if they're not hobbyists, they're professionals doing, I don't know, surveillance or whatever. I guess I'm asking a question about, you're in controlled airspace, you leave the controlled airspace. Do you then go into do you expect to have a UTM there, in sort of a UTM bubble into which you will then enter, and that'll be handled by your chap at the airport, the arriving airport, I guess?
Yeah, that's what we're counting on. As we gain altitude, we're fairly quickly above the 400 feet. That's
of course.
That they are permitted. Of course, non-cooperative actors are and will be an issue by definition. But we encourage hobbyists. We think it's great as many people as possible to learn more about aviation, the rules of the air. We encourage responsible hobby, and I think the real people who pursue this as a hobby care a lot about that. In terms of an airport environment, the limitations for small drones still apply. There's a radius around the airport; they're not allowed to fly, so there wouldn't be ideally any touch points.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that before.
I mean, with the cooperative ones.
Yeah, with cooperative players, by definition, yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
So how do you see your future as Dronomics? Are you going to stay building aeroplanes in Bulgaria and then roll out your service to customers around Europe? Is that the plan?
We're at an inflection point because as we're finalizing the development of the aircraft, we will, until now we were an R&D organization, but now we are going to essentially add an operating entity, and actually several ones, because we're starting with Europe and a couple of other markets outside of Europe. That will operate a lot like an airline. So I see us essentially becoming that sort of ecosystem player where if we outsource something, it will be the mass production of the aircraft. But retaining the R&D and the operating businesses.
So what are the aircraft made of?
Carbon fiber, composites.
Right. Okay. And so your drone port operators and your en route operators, are you training them yourselves?
So we need drone port operators to be at a minimum PPL, but ideally, instrument rated or CPL.
Wow.
So we're not talking about, enthusiasts, small drone pilots. We need them to be very cognizant because in controlled airspace, it's much different than in use space.
Yeah. Well, indeed. But again, I mean, I'm really interested in what Dronomics might look like in 3 years' time. It will be signing contracts with both the FedExes of this world, I guess, and with large organisations that have, pharma, for example, that have factories in various places. You will be trying to roll out more drone ports. I guess you'll do that as and when customers arrive. Yeah. You'll be training your staff and you'll be operating your services. Will your devices have your brand on the side, your logo on the tail, things like that?
Absolutely. We're very proud of our work, but it's not so much about the name, but the quality we can deliver to the customers.
Of course. But drone.
We are not planning to sell the drone, so it wouldn't be that Lufthansa could buy a bunch of Black Swans.
Right. So well, let's use that as an example. Lufthansa don't come to you and buy 5 of your devices. Lufthansa come to you and sign a service contract.
Exactly, because the routes that they can cover with their existing freighter network, if they can fill a freighter, they don't need us. They need us for the feeder flights, consolidating that cargo to come to that entry point for them.
Yeah, right. Okay, and so COVID has been obviously very disastrous, but it's been less disastrous for the cargo industry. So are you optimistic about where we go from here?
We're talking to the forwarder customers. We haven't, they don't see anything slowing down. Air cargo will continue to rise in costs as vaccination rollouts continue, and the way that they're sort of going slower than some governments expected, there will be more and more pressure to uplift that capacity by air. So they expect that to continue for the next couple of years at least. I think the cargo market is definitely a good market right now to be in, on the manned or unmanned side.
Yeah, but even though it's an unmanned delivery service, an unmanned service, there's still quite a lot of humans involved, aren't there? You're going to need one at each end, some measure across the top and what have you. So, and your operations center will be in Bulgaria?
We don't know. It's a good place to have such an operations center. Several big corporations have similar, of course, not for aviation, but for other types of businesses. They're nerve centers out of here.
Educated workforce, etc. So
yeah. I think Europe is kind of a different case because in Europe it could be one for the EU, but in almost all other markets you have to have a different ops center, you know, because control of their airspace needs to stay within their territory.
Yeah. So any plans to move outside Europe?
Yeah, so the two other markets we're considering are outside of Europe. We haven't announced it yet, but we will soon. And these are, you know, countries with large territory and, you know, favorable regulators.
Right. Well, I can guess a few of them, I think,
from
that hint alone. Indeed. Well, look, thank you very much for your time today, Silvan. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I really wish you well. I hope that we can talk further. I'm very interested in the stuff about developing drone ports and having to get that stuff done. And obviously you've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and no doubt a lot of money developing your airframe as well. And I really hope that it goes very well. So I'd just like to thank you one more time. And on behalf of everyone else, thank you so much for sharing your information. I think it's been really fantastic.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words and a great conversation.
Indeed. No, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back shortly. And don't forget, please, thank you, don't forget to rate this webinar. The poll has just come up on your screen. Please rate the webinar, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you.